Welcome to the show designed to give you crypto confidence. Created by the marketing communications specialists at Blocksparks, we want to help you learn about cryptocurrency and blockchain in a safe and friendly place. Because we believe this stuff is far too exciting to leave it to the geeks. Come and join us to learn more. Welcome to the Crypto Confidence Podcast. And today we're going to explore a subject which many of our listeners are really curious about. That is cryptocurrency mining. I talked about this a little bit in a previous episode in relation to energy use, but it really is quite a complex and fascinating subject in its own right. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Felicity Feinman from ArgoMining. Welcome, Felicity.
Thanks, Maya. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, in the interest of transparency, I'm pleased to reveal that Blocksparks is working with ArgoMining as ambassadors for their brand to help make crypto mining accessible to anyone who wants to get involved, because we're really intrigued by the potential. So let's start then by digging in and talking about what is mining? What does crypto mining really mean, or what does it look like, Felicity?
Well, that's a great question. And so I think to explain the purpose of mining, I like to first talk about traditional bank transactions. So, for example, in Canada, we have something called an e-transfer. I don't know if you have that in the UK, but
maybe that's something like a SWIFT transfer, or... Yeah, I think we have something similar.
It's essentially if I'm going to send you money, or even a wire transfer, if I was going to send money from Canada to the UK, my bank would talk to your bank. They would say, okay, Felicity has X amount of dollars and she's going to send them over to the UK. And then your bank would talk to my bank and say, yes, Maya has room in her account to receive these funds. And then over the process of a few days, the funds would arrive in your account. So the key there is that there is two trusted third parties actually that are verifying the transaction. So that's what gives you and I the trust to know that this transaction will be completed. And the idea of cryptocurrency transactions is that they are peer-to-peer, particularly with Bitcoin. That's the easiest example to give because it's the biggest currency. And so when you have a peer-to-peer transaction, you don't have that third party, so you need another way to verify that the transaction is real, that I really have the money to send and that you really can receive it. And so the process that verifies the transactions is mining. Okay. And essentially mining, it's a bit of a confusing term. You know, you think of like people with hard hats and pickaxes.
Yes, I keep channeling Tolkien or something.
Tolkien. What is it? The mines of Loch Gomorrah or something. Yeah.
Anyway. Or Hogwarts or something. I think it's definitely totally some lovely images.
But please don't troll me, Tolkien fans. Anyway, so when you complete the process of mining, it has nothing to do with rocks or pickaxes or hard hats. It's actually computers competing to solve mathematical equations. And this isn't typically computers like a PC that you would have in your home. They're extremely powerful and they are solving cryptographic equations. So that's where the crypto comes in. And when these computers compete, eventually one computer will solve the equation correctly, and then that is recorded in a series of transactions that becomes a block, and then that is on the blockchain. And once the equation is solved, all of these computers around the world talk to each other and they say, okay, this is the new updated ledger. This transaction took place at this time. And so the blockchain is actually a record of transactions that goes back to the beginning of Bitcoin in this case, or it can be another cryptocurrency. So I guess the one sentence explanation of mining would be that it is a process whereby computers compete to perform complex mathematical equations, and the computer that succeeds in performing the equation receives cryptocurrency in the form of the transaction fee. So in reality, what it is like is there's a computer that is performing equations, and they receive cryptocurrency for those equations.
Great. That was a long sentence.
But my one sentence. I'm still working on it.
It's a very difficult concept to reduce to one sentence, and I think you brought lots of clarity to it. I think a common misunderstanding is that mining is purely about generating new blocks or new bitcoins, whereas actually, as you clearly described, it's really about maintaining the entire network, doing all of those things that those intermediary banks would be doing in the traditional finance network. And it's an awful lot more than digging new bitcoins out of a mine shaft.
Yeah, and that goes into something that I think people also don't always understand about Bitcoin, which is that there's actually a fixed supply of Bitcoin. So there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins mined. And that at that point, when we reach 21 million, it doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin miners will cease to exist, because even though they're not receiving new Bitcoins, they can still receive the transaction fees. And so the transaction fee is what miners receive for verifying a transaction.
And by that time, there'll be probably a great many transactions happening on that particular blockchain, even more than there are today. So let's hope the miners will keep going.
Yes, let's hope.
Excellent. Now, obviously, you mentioned that it's not your average home PC that this mining is being done on now, not with Bitcoin anyway. And what Argo offers is a chance to buy into cloud mining. Can you explain what that is and why it's such an important trend?
Yeah, that was a very good introduction. So the computers that perform mining, they can also be called rigs. They're quite expensive. They're quite technical. Currently, the main rigs that are used are called GPUs or ASICs. And they're quite expensive to buy. And so at one point, way back in the history of Bitcoin, when you got into mining, people would buy a rig and they would have it in their basement running off of their regular power source. And they would be able to earn a profit in crypto by mining in that way. That's simply not possible anymore. You can perhaps, if you're in a country where power is completely free, there are a few countries like that, or you're very, very technically savvy, maybe you could make a small profit. But at this point in time, really you need a large facility to mine. And so at Argo, our founders, John Bixby and Mike Edwards, they actually tried to mine with the basement style.
Oh, wow, they did all that.
And so they learned this themselves. Yeah, so they realized that they couldn't make a profit that way. But the interesting thing about mining is that it's directly tied to the ideology behind Bitcoin and behind most cryptocurrencies, which is decentralization. So the idea that instead of having this one central bank or a few central banks verifying every transaction, transactions will be verified by thousands of nodes over the world. But at this point, because mining has become so technical, you have these huge facilities with many, many rigs who are making huge profits, and the average person can no longer be involved in the network. So the idea behind cloud mining is that we as Argo, we do have a large facility where we can keep up to date with the latest trends, we can buy new machines, we can ensure that we're running as efficiently as possible. But individuals can actually purchase the rigs. So they are essentially paying our power fees, and then they still receive the transaction fee. So they're still participating in the network, and it's still decentralized in that sense that there's many different people participating in the network. But you just don't have this really loud, expensive, difficult machine sitting in your basement.
Yeah, so chewing up your domestic electricity bill and possibly setting fire to your apartment or something. Yes, exactly. I know there's lots of interesting stories. As listeners might detect from your accent, you're in Canada. You're somewhere where there's lots of natural cooling. And do you have sort of geothermal power, or what makes Vancouver such a great place for mining?
That's an excellent question, actually. And to clarify, at Argo, we have offices in London. Obviously, I'm not British, but we do have some British people that we work with. We also listed on the London Stock Exchange. And we also have offices in Ottawa, in Canada, as well as Vancouver. So I'm way out in Vancouver, but our mining facilities are actually in Quebec, Canada.
Ah, okay.
And Quebec has some of the cheapest electricity prices in the world, and it's also primarily hydroelectricity, which is renewable.
Right. Okay. So it's just the way that we're able to work together in 2018, 2019, that we can choose to, you're living in one place, I'm in another country, we're recording together, and we're mining Bitcoin in another part of the world altogether, taking advantage of those natural features and the arbitrage of the world. That's really exciting. That's what I love about working this way as we are today. So cloud mining then means mining not on your own computer, but on a computer that could be anywhere.
Yes,
and in your case, it's in Quebec. Fantastic. And hydroelectricity then, that's really interesting because I think a lot of people enjoyed the recent episode where I did go off on a little bit of a rant about the way the media hates on Bitcoin for electricity use. It just seems such, I don't know, it's been a bugbear of mine for years, the whole idea of lazy journalism. And, you know, I think we live in an era of clickbait, and headlines have to be provocative and often quite dumbed down, even in quite high-end publications. And they can really only show one slice of an aspect of a story, but it feels like a real cop-out this year. There's been an awful lot of focus on the amount of power that Bitcoin mining in particular actually uses up and somehow destroys in order to generate this. But hydroelectric power, of course, is energy that's just there anyway. Water falling from a height, all you're doing is transforming it into something that can be more useful.
Yes, that's quite right. And I listened to your last episode, and I really enjoyed your rant as well. So I'm glad to hear that other listeners were on the same page. I think in terms of the environmental impact of mining, I think it's something that a lot of people are aware about. There's a lot of headlines about it, as you highlighted. And I think the interesting thing is that as a new industry, there's this heightened focus on exactly how much power we're using. There's many industries all over the world that are very energy intensive, and we as a society agree that these services are needed, and therefore the energy that they expend is acceptable.
Yes, we don't add it up and question it either.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of mining, we need all ideas on the table. I think it's important to have conversations about the environment. You know, we at Argo, obviously, we do value the environment. That's one of the reasons that we chose to have our facility in a place where we could use renewable energy. I think it's important to talk about the mines that use coal, which has terrible impacts on the environment.
Yes.
And I think it's also good to highlight how many people who are passionate about crypto are working to find new ways to capture the heat that's generated from mining. There's projects that take the heat generated by the computers in these facilities, and then we'll use that to power public buildings, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. That's really positive, just kind of using a byproduct and adding even more value to the entire production.
Yeah, I think there's so many positive aspects of cryptocurrency. I think decentralization is an important goal that we can head towards as a society. I think we're talking about making banking more empowering, making finances something that doesn't have to be so expensive. For instance, for me to just send you fees, for example, you work for Argo as a brand ambassador. It's so wonderful that I can send you a fee through Bitcoin instead of having to do an international money transfer and send, pay exorbitant fees on that and wait multiple days and things like that. I think
a lot of our clients prefer to settle in crypto because we're working with people all over the world, and it seems crazy that we would be writing about this stuff and promoting it, and then we'd have to say, well, but can you send us a wire transfer?
Yeah, can you imagine? So I think what I'm saying is the environment is an important discussion to have, and but I don't think that conversation stops at crypto. I think we should be talking about renewable energy in every other industry as well.
Absolutely. Here. And I think, do you think the term mining has got anything to do with the way that people misunderstand it? Because for me, mining really senses a kind of generational process, whereas actually the process you're describing and the process this electricity is going to is like all the energy used by the entire financial industry, all the my bank and your bank and the people they employ and the cars that those people drive to work in the morning and the branches that they have on the high street, and all of that has to go into the energy equation because it's all being replaced by that mining process.
I wholeheartedly agree.
It's so misunderstood. And also it's obviously fair to acknowledge that different blockchains have different requirements for mining, and proof of work isn't the only approach. And we're not going to dig into the weeds of that today. But this episode will be, we're talking just before Christmas, but this episode will be going out in mid-January, which I think is going to be just around the 10th anniversary of the Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain.
Oh, exciting.
So we'll have to have a little bit of Bitcoin cake or something to celebrate that. But Bitcoin obviously is expensive in terms of power to mine, but it's not the only mining package that you offer at Argo, is that you do have some other potential purchases available.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you talk about mining or holding cryptocurrency as well. I think when people have traditional stock portfolios, and I think that is a good comparison to make because at this point, most cryptocurrencies are speculative. I think when you have a traditional stock portfolio, it is typically diversified. And I think most people understand why it's important to invest in diverse stocks. And I would say the same thing for cryptocurrency. Of course, this isn't financial advice.
No, we don't give financial advice on this podcast. Just to be clear. Financial advice. We're just chatting and speculating between ourselves here.
Yes, exactly. But that being said, and also I think for people who are new to crypto, I think it's great to try out different blockchains and different tokens. So if you're interested, we at Argo offer Bitcoin, Bitcoin Gold, Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, Horizon, Zcash, and Komodo. So those are quite a few different coins, and they also run on different algorithms, meaning that we have different rigs devoted to different tokens. So that's getting a little technical, but all to say, I think if you're interested in mining, there's quite a few different models out there and quite a bit more research you can do into algorithms and tokens and blockchains and which you think best suits your values. For instance, Zcash is more privacy focused. So that's one you can research if that's something you care about. Ethereum, of course, supports dApps, decentralized applications. So if you're someone that's interested in building applications or perhaps is involved in tech, maybe that's something you'd like to support. And then, of course, you have Bitcoin, which is the big...
the daddy.
Yes, I was going to say the big daddy, and then I was like the big mother, the big parent of...
Yes, let's say mother, because it's such a creative process. So yes, I think we'll start calling rechristen Bitcoin Big Mama for the new year. So basically, just because I'm still making sure I understand this correctly, when people buy a rig or rent, because it's on a monthly basis, a rig with Argo, what they're doing is paying a fixed price of the power, and then the coin that they generate is automatically just paid straight out into your wallet, and that what we're doing then is speculating that that coin will be worth what the power is worth, and ideally worth more in the future, depending on what we want to do with that coin, how long we want to hold it, or whatever.
Yes, I think that's correct. I think that's very well articulated. And I think there's different ways to use cloud mining if it's something you want to get involved in. I think if you're someone who would like to hold some cryptocurrency but doesn't necessarily want to spend a lot of time monitoring markets and things like that, mining is a good way to guarantee that you'll have a certain amount of a coin landing in your wallet every month.
Like a savings plan where you're chipping in a fixed amount each month. I know a lot of investors talk about dollar cost averaging and buying sort of, X dollars worth of a crypto each month. This is a way to automate that, I guess. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't looked at it that way. So you could see it as a savings account for crypto.
And I think, every individual has their own financial situation, and I wouldn't want to advise them on how to use the service. I think you have to look at it and see if it makes sense for you.
Absolutely. And I know that Argo is creating a lot of interesting education and material around that. And I have to declare an interest there because I've been writing for you as well. But I think the whole area of just educating people about crypto and making it accessible and understandable. Mining isn't the easiest of concepts for people to get their heads around when starting out. And I think just the way it's moved with Bitcoin from CPUs to GPUs to ASICs and being completely out of reach of most people nowadays to start doing anything with. This is such a great way of bringing it back and going back to the real dream of decentralization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of the crypto community, we're at a time when most of the people who are in crypto do spend a lot of time on it. They're very engaged, they're very knowledgeable, and they're quite technical. It's also in terms of demographics, it's not a particularly diverse community at the moment. There's people all over the world, but it's mostly people under the age of 35 and mostly men. And I think as we move towards mass adoption, we need to start having very accessible conversations about crypto. So I think we at Argo, what we're trying to do is get those really knowledgeable, technical early adopters talking to people who maybe are skeptical about crypto or don't quite know how to get involved or need the concepts broken down in a different way to them. So like many cryptocurrency companies out there right now, we're trying to make crypto easier to understand and welcoming as well, because for this to become the future global financial ecosystem, which I think we would all love to see, we need to welcome everybody to the table.
Definitely. And we've got to sort of set the table a little lower or put some good steps up to it. I think there's still a bit of a movement somewhere in the dim and distant history of crypto of people who want to almost keep it to themselves as a secret, subversive thing. And, I think we're very much brand-wise on the same page as you, that mass adoption is the only thing that matters. And the only way we're going to do that is by making the way that people interact with it much more straightforward, much more safe, much more everyday. And that's when it's going to tip over and people won't think about the protocols or the mining or the hash rate or anything else. They just think, oh yeah, some Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think crypto needs to become more practical because the truth is right now it's hard to buy crypto. It's complicated, exchanging it, deciding which token you want to purchase. It's all quite complex. And so I think the work you guys are doing is so important in terms of breaking down those barriers. And then my hope is as we make it easier to understand and we welcome more people into the community, those people will bring new ideas that will push us forward. Because if you look at internet adoption as a parallel, everyone who opens a web browser doesn't understand HTTP. And we're just not quite at that point where someone can open the equivalent of a web browser for crypto and get engaged that easily.
Yeah, we need the smartphone browser version or with the app version or something. It's a little way down the line yet, but it is coming because we all know it's really necessary. I mean, we wanted to start this podcast because we knew it was complicated, and I've been writing about this stuff for a while, but I realized that some of the stuff I was writing was really long and complex because these are complex issues. And so it's really good that you can come on to this podcast and just chat with me about it, because if we'd written all this down, it would have been thousands of words long, and not everybody wants to consume information that way. I love what you're doing on the site with GIFs and videos and things like that to just kind of bring more of a multimedia feel to it and open it up to the world. Not everybody wants to read long essays of the kind of things I tend to churn out.
If I can give a little shameless plug, though, I do think the blogs that you've written for Argo break down terms really, really well, and particularly the one you wrote about comparing when you got involved in crypto to when you learned about email in the 90s. I thought that was such a fun blog, and so
showing my age.
But even, I remember when I was really young, my dad got us a computer. Like, I had a computer when I was 8. And so I remember putting in floppy disks and playing these super pixelated computer games and things like that. So I could absolutely relate to your description of email, and yeah.
Oh, well, I'll see your floppy disk and raise you cassette machines that we had to plug in in order to load a game. Isn't it funny how far we've come? And it is interesting that there are those of us in this space now who've lived through more than one revolution in terms of technology. And whilst there's all these amazing, bright young things doing lots of exciting stuff, we were talking about how young the field is generally and how many people there are who are just very, very academic and very, very bright. But some of us who are communicating it are people who've maybe seen the effect of other things coming and going, or bubbles blowing up and then settling down, and things going through those phases from the early adopters and the really nascent emerging technology through to something we absolutely take for granted every day and can't really imagine having lived without if you're a digital native.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I was thinking about my dad this morning, actually, and at his home in Montreal, we went and we went through his childhood toys and things like that, and he had a computer where it's essentially marbles that either go through a 0 or a 1 slot. Wow. And so it's basically, it's a calculator, but it's the origins of computing. And I was just thinking about how for him over the course of his lifetime to go from this toy with marbles and then to have this extraordinarily powerful computer sitting in your pocket. And I think to me that's the pitch to people who are wondering, why should I get involved in crypto? You have a chance to watch it go from this somewhat clunky technology that's so powerful but doesn't quite have the user experience, and to watch it evolve over the next 10 years. I just think it's going to be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and the speed of change is just accelerating so fast on top of everything else. You know, the time we took from the marbles through to the pocket calculator and then the sort of Windows DOS and now the speed that we're going now. It makes it very difficult. But as we are at the start of a new year, maybe we should wrap up by polishing the crystal ball a little bit and say, what do we think that 2019 is going to bring to the world of crypto? I'm not talking about prices. Let's not go there. But but in terms of the technology, where are we going to be on the things that matter?
It's a good question. So I think one thing that I'm watching in 2019 is institutional adoption. So there are quite a few big banks that are beginning to adopt blockchain technology and will be making some announcements in 2019, or I expect they'll be making announcements. I was also recently at a conference in Silicon Valley, and there were quite a few big tech companies that were there, like IBM, that are researching how they can create blockchain applications and maybe even get involved in cryptocurrencies. So I think there'll be some announcements there. So I'm interested in watching all of that because getting these big institutions involved will absolutely change crypto for better or for worse. And I think it will also move us towards mass adoption as more people start to realize the potential of the technology. And then I think in 2019 as well, people will be watching, in particular, US regulators to see how they're going to regulate cryptocurrencies and particularly Bitcoin. So I think that's going to be something to watch. And I think regulation in crypto, regulation is a bit of a bad word because people like to one of the attractions of the technology is that it gives individuals so much freedom. But I think for us to move towards mass adoption, regulation is critical. So I think, there's two sides of that coin, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in 2019.
Yeah. It might not please everybody,
Absolutely.
more institutional involvement and regulation, but in terms of accessibility and adoption, right with you, it needs to happen. So it's going to be an exciting year. I think the future is bright, and wishing ArgoMining every success with it.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you.
Thanks for joining us today, Felicity.
Thanks very much.
H is for hashing, and also hash rate and hash power. This is a great fit with today's interview about mining, because hash is one of those terms you'll hear bandied around the crypto mining community a lot, especially cryptographic hash algorithms. These algorithms are what keeps the Bitcoin network and other networks secure. They're the very building blocks of the cryptocurrency economy. In everyday language, we talk about making a hash of something when we mess it up, but also about deliberately mixing things together like ingredients in a recipe. We also hash things out in conversation to try and get something sorted out or agreed. All these uses include the idea of chopping something into bits and recombining it, and this is the same sense in which the word is used in cryptography. When you hash a piece of digital content, which could be a document or a public key or a list of words, your processor runs a specific set of mathematical functions on it and spits out a fixed-length digital alphanumeric string, that is, a set of letters and numbers. We talked a bit about this way back in episode 2 of the Crypto Confidence podcast, and the important thing about it is that it only works one way. You can generate the hash from the content, but the other way around is practically impossible. You can't create the recipe from the cake or generate the thumb from the thumbprint, and you can't reverse engineer a private key from a public one. Bitcoin's blockchain uses a 256-bit algorithm used extensively in online security for many other industries. It was originally developed by the National Security Agency in the US. It's called Secure Hash Algorithm 256, so you'll sometimes see referenced SHA 256, not just in relation to cryptocurrency, but anywhere secure digital encryption is needed. Take a look at the policy statements for your online banking, for example. That's because a common use of this kind of hash function is to apply password access securely, without the service itself having to know what the password is. So when you create a user account with any web service requiring the password is run through the hash function, and it's the hash digest of the message that's stored by your bank's website, for example. When you type your password to log in, the same hash function is run on the word you've entered each time, and the server checks whether the result matches the stored digest. That means that if a hacker is able to access the bank's database containing the stored hashes, they won't be able to immediately compromise all the user accounts because there's no easy way to find the passwords which produce any given hash. Of course, if the user then uses the same email and password combination elsewhere for a less secure site, then the user breaks that protection, and you likely wind up getting your bank hacked anyway. Not because the hashing algorithm was compromised, though. It's far easier to compromise the weakest link in any system, which is always the human. Anyway, in Bitcoin mining, the difficulty of the algorithm is what matters, because miners effectively compete to solve it for the right to write the next block in the chain. The chance of solving it for a specific outcome is incredibly low, and requires a vast amount of computational power to commit it. That's why mining in this way is called proof of work. The inputs for the function are all of the most recent, not yet confirmed transactions, along with some additional inputs relating to the timestamp and a reference to the previous block, because the blocks all have to link to one another in, yep, you guessed it, a chain. At the present time, the reward for solving the Bitcoin hash is an allocation of 12.5 Bitcoin. That's presently worth around $40,000. However, in practice, rather than one lucky lottery winner, miners tend to band together in pools to collectivize their activity and attack the hash together, splitting the reward. The difficulty is continually adjusted by the algorithm to ensure that with all the combined processing power of all the computers on the network, a new block gets solved approximately every 10 minutes. So new coins are minted and released to the market at a steady rate, and transactions confirmed in batches. Every few years, the block reward halves. When Bitcoin started, the block reward was an amazing 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. But the Bitcoin code includes a function ensuring that after every 210,000 blocks, or about 4 years, given 10 minutes per block, this reward should drop by half. This ensures the scarcity and deflationary aspect of Bitcoin currency. So that's hashing. And all hash rate is the measure of a miner's performance. In the case of the proof-of-work consensus algorithm which powers Bitcoin, you can think of hash rate as the speed with which a miner solves the Bitcoin code. Hash rate is measured in hashes per second, and usually big multiples because the chips which mine cryptos do a lot of hashing. Overall, the Bitcoin network performs trillions of hashes per second. A kilohash is 1,000 hashes per second, and a petahash is 1 quadrillion. That's one written with 15 zeros after it, if you ever have to write it down. The hash rate drops when prices drop, as fewer miners stay on the network. Indeed, some large industrial mining companies closed their doors during 2018. But it doesn't affect Bitcoin itself. That's because the difficulty adjustment algorithm kicks in to ensure the success rate remains more or less constant around 10 minutes or so. It's clever like that. So now you too can mutter about hashing and hash rate, whether Bitcoins or the leftover potatoes are involved. It's all about mixing stuff up to create something deliciously new and important. Enjoy. Thanks for listening to Crypto Confidence. If you like what you hear, please do consider leaving us a review via your favourite podcasting app and joining the conversation online in whichever way you prefer. Full contact details are in the show notes for this episode. And remember, nothing in this podcast or our related social media, nor anything else published by BlockSparks OU at any location, is intended as financial, investment or trading advice. Everything we write or say represents our personal opinions for your information, education and entertainment only. You should not make any decisions based on anything we share with you, not without undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with appropriate professional advisors. Crypto Confidence is all about being smart and informed and making the right choices for you.